The first thing you'll notice about the box that I'm going to work on today is that it is larger than the original boxes I was working with. I made these as gifts for friends, and I wanted to make myself one that would hold more dice than a single set or a couple of sets. So I decided to go with a larger one. I got the original boxes that look just like this but smaller from Michaels. These ran about $2, a little less than $2 a piece, and this one was about $3. So the only difference in how I'm going to go about fabricating this is that the original boxes were made with these tiny little eyes that I also bought at Michaels in the jewelry section. And they're a perfect scale for this box, but they would look wee on this box. So instead, what I did is I picked an eye that I liked, and I took a photograph of it. And then I found these, which are called 1-inch clear epoxy stickers. And they just look like little lenses, basically, with stickum on the back. I ended up with an eye that is very similar, but is a much better scale for my box. Alright, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is paint the interior of my box. I want to talk a little bit about the paint I'm using, which is the cheapest craft store paint I can find. You know, $1 or less a bottle. It's perfect for this project because I don't need fine detail. I don't need paint that flows perfectly. I don't need paint that covers perfectly. These boxes are a little aged, a little dingy, and they don't need a perfect paint job. So this cheap paint works great. I'm going to start out with espresso brown and black, and mix it up and add a little water and start painting the interior of the box. So you can tell I'm being very careful. Really, with this project, you can just slop paint onto it and not be neat, and it will look just as good as if you take a ton of time to be as neat and tidy as you can be. There, so interior of the box, done. Okay, step two. Step two is putting on my eye and sculpting it in place. So I have the little eye that I made, and I'm just going to take a little piece of painter's tape. You could use double stick tape, you could use stickum or glue, poster adhesive, whatever you happen to have around. Honestly, it's not going to be visible or really integral to anything other than just keeping the eye in place while you do your sculpting. So I think that's where my eye is going to go. So the product I'm going to use for doing the sculpting is JB Weld Quickwood. There are lots of different versions of this out there. This is the one I happen to be using. It's a good one. I like it a lot. It works really well. Gloves. It's probably not really going to hurt you, but putting gloves on also doesn't really hurt you. So put some gloves on to mix up this two-part epoxy putty. And I'm just going to take it and cut off, oh, I don't know, let's start with 3/4 of an inch. My preferred method for myself to mix it is to actually break it in half like that, and then put the two pieces back together so you've made sort of a layered sandwich, and then start doing this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch off, I don't know, probably a quarter of what I mixed, and roll it into a ball, and then roll it into a little cigar shape like that. And I'm going to apply my little cigar at the bottom of the eye. Getting it to stick is a little tricky, which is why I like to put the double stick tape or painter's tape or whatever at the bottom to hold it on. Okay, not pretty, but that's okay. So I'm gonna just dip my finger in water and work that into sort of a better shape. There we go. That first line of epoxy putty is actually the most difficult part of this whole project, getting it to go on in a way you like it. But it's easily workable, so just work it in. And then I'm going to do the same thing by taking and putting a piece on the top. And basically, I'm just going to keep working it until it looks good to me. Adding pieces, using some of my little sculpting tools, and just making it blend into the box. I'm going to stop talking and just sculpt for a little while. Okay, now that I have the basic sculpt done with my fingers, and I just have it sort of roughly blended in, I'm gonna use some sculpting tools and again use some water and just sort of refine some of my edges. So I've been working with this epoxy for about 5 minutes, and it's starting, it's not really setting completely, but it's starting to become a little more difficult to work with. So you just gotta keep track of, you know, where you are. You might have to sculpt a little faster than what you're comfortable with, just to make sure the epoxy doesn't completely harden. All right, it's been about half an hour, and I've finished sculpt, and I've waited about half an hour, and it's pretty hard. And I think it's ready to paint. So I'm not going to bore you by making you watch me base paint out a box. But basically what I'm going to do is do a quick wash over the whole surface, and I'm just going to go back to my my big sloppy brush and base paint this thing sort of a silvery gray. Alright, so the whole box is based out with gray. I didn't worry about getting paint on the latch because the latch should look old and nasty. So before this is too dry, I'm going to take a brush with a darker mix of the gray, almost black, honestly, and work in to these edges. Just give this a little more depth and life, and just refine the paint a little. I'm just adding a little like that. I'm going to take this brush and just pull it out. Okay, I'm pretty happy with the overall base coat on this. It's actually more than a base coat. This is pretty much the finished paint on this part of it. Okay, now that we have this painted, roughly painted, the next step, I like to get it to this point before I decide on teeth, because they each have sort of a different look depending on how you do the eye and what color paint, and I've done all kinds of different teeth. Teeth where it's two on the outside and one on the and two on the inside. I've done sort of snake, lizardy sort of fangs. I've done this guy where the teeth interlock, and I sort of just like to see what the character is before I give him the teeth. And I actually think for this one, I like these sort of, they're a little goofy, the interior teeth. So I think this guy is going to get that style of teeth. And basically that just means opening the box and using the same epoxy putty and sculpting some teeth on the inside. Okay, so the important part about this is just getting the epoxy to really stick to the box, and you just sort of smooth it out and use some water and do that. I'm going to basically work this down into the lid so that it's stuck real well. And for teeth like this, where they're on the interior, just close the box and press it down real good. And you'll make sure that they're not interfering with the lid. So basically, that's almost all there is to it. I'm going to do that, and then I'm just going to come through with my knife and sort of define some teeth. Okay, so I had sculpted the teeth, they're drying. If I was going to do teeth on the outside of this one instead, let the paint completely dry, the epoxy putty will stick to the acrylic paint, and I would just work them in just like I did the eye, making sure that they're blended in nice and so they're really grabbing hold of the wood, and making sure that they didn't interfere with the clasp and all that kind of stuff. So probably the most important part of this whole thing to make this really look good is the painting around the eye. So what I'm going to do is take some basically pure white, and I'm gonna paint some highlight on this. And you have a really good blending tool attached to your hand, so I like to just drag my finger across it. You can also take another brush without any paint and a little water and blend that way. So we're just getting a cool little highlight on this guy. There. And now, every time you do a highlight, you should also do a bit of a low light. And then I'm just going to go in and do a few more little details. The next thing I'm going to do is to paint the banding. Basically, just take pure black and paint over it. And don't worry about the nail heads, because we're going to deal with those separately. Alright, when you have a coat you're relatively happy with on that, I'm just going to take a cotton swab and touch each nail head. Alright, so I got both sides of the banding painted, and I actually have decided to do something on this one that I didn't really do on the first one because the size of the box didn't matter. I'm going to take and mix up a little thin paint, dark paint, on a fine brush and hit the interiors of these cracks in the boards. Okay, so I have painted the whole outside of the box and low-lighted the planks and pretty happy with it. I have places where the wood is showing through, and on this project, that's actually great because it just makes it look more worn. Don't worry about having paint covering absolutely everything because it actually makes it look better if it doesn't. The great thing about the wood epoxy we've been using is it's the same color basically as the wood, so if in little areas things show through, it all looks the same. Alright, so time to open it up. Our teeth are relatively hard, so we're going to do a quick little paint on the teeth. The first thing I'm going to do is paint the gum line with some, you know, goopy black and brown just to set them apart, the teeth apart. And if you get paint on the teeth like I just did, don't worry about it because we're gonna paint over it anyway. So there we go. So there's the first step, just a little black paint. Probably should let that dry before I start with white because I'm gonna end up messing up the white paint, but I'm being impatient. So I'm just gonna come through and hit with a little white paint. And again, in this case, don't worry about filling in every little nook and cranny and every detail. The wood look showing through, it's epoxy, but the wood look showing through actually is great because it makes it look more like the mimic is created from the wood. So the interior here looks terrible. So I'm just painting the teeth, and then I need to go back and blend in the epoxy so that it sort of just goes away on the interior. There we go. So I have a little bit of white on there, and then I'm just going to come through with a fine brush and pick some places. I don't want to do every tooth, but pick some places to separate the teeth out, make them look a little dingy. And then I'm going to use some yellow. And really just very little paint on the brush. Just hit them with a little wash of yellow so they look a little sickly. And then I'm going to take just a tiny bit of red. Put a little bit of red on my brush and just wash the gum lines with a little bit of red. Might do a little bit more than that. All right, I think those are teeth. So basically, now I just need to let this guy dry. When it's 100% dry, I'll do some little touch-ups and some little fixes, and then I'll spray it with some clear spray, and it will be done. All right, so I've done some paint touch-up, just gotten some areas that I didn't love fixed, and now it's time to go into my spray booth. The box, I believe, is done. That is what it looks like all the way around. I just did a couple of thin coats of clear semi-gloss just to get a little sheen. And I actually did a little extra heavy around the inside of the lid here and in the teeth so they look a little slimy. There is the finished box.